The future of Jeep off-roading is here. So we're going to talk to the guys that know these vehicles best to see what it takes to get a plug-in hybrid off-road worthy. And once it is, will it be a viable option today? Brought to you by Epic Adventure Outfitters. This is my 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. It is lifted on 38-inch tires, and we do daily drive it. And with today's gas prices, it cost me about $175 to fill this thing up, and $20 a day just to take my kid to school. That's why today we're gonna check out the Jeep 4xe and see if it's a viable option for those of us that daily drive our off-road vehicles. I wanna know, is a lifted 4xe any good? So I'm over here at Epic and they're working on a, what is it called? Is it a 4xe?
Well, it depends where you live. Could be a 4xe, could be a 4xe. What do we call it here, Landon? 4xe. 4xe, I guess.
Landon would know because he has one.
Yes, he definitely has the nicest one. Well, that might fit well.
Today on Epic's Lift was Blaze's rig in for lifting tires. And while there isn't anything specific about lifting a 4xe, there are some things to consider while wheeling one. This particular package consisted of a TerraFlex 3.5-inch lift kit, including bump stops, sway bar links, and track bar brackets. Epic Adventure Outfitters also installed the front drop brackets to correct geometry, and finished it with the Falcon 2.1 mono tube shocks. But first, out with the old, and in true Epic fashion, all unnecessary parts end up on the floor. And in with the new. Now for those of you that already have the 4xe in your driveway, you're already going to know a bunch of this stuff. But if you're like me and you're curious about them, I asked Landon to give me a quick tour.
I have a normal 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder engine. Puts out 270 horsepower, 280 something foot-pounds of torque, which moves these Jeeps along pretty good on its own. But on the 4xe, we have a battery pack that protrudes through the floor underneath the rear passenger seat, and that gives us an additional 40 kilometers worth of full electric range and normal mild hybrid usage. The 4xe is always a hybrid, so it always has the full amount of power. but your range just tapers off. So they're a lot of fun to drive, but there's a lot of stuff going on underneath here. This is all I believe this is the wiring from the charger. The charger inverter is all above your head. And all the wiring, all the high voltage wiring is shown in orange because obviously it is dangerous and those who are not qualified should not touch it. And what's crazy is this little skid plate is where all the high voltage cables come in for the, I believe they call it the P2 motor in the transmission. The P1 motor is actually mounted on the front accessory drive of the engine. So there's two of them.
All that was left was to put in the drive shaft and tires.
Look at this, man. It's electric. Can't even hear it.
All right, well, the guys at Epic just finished installing the lift and wheels on the 4xe, and Landon actually owns one, so I'm gonna go for a ride with him and ask him some questions that I'm wondering about the 4xe. So, like, what can he expect now that he's got bigger tires and stuff? Does it really affect how?
It does, right? Not only is the circumference of the tire bigger, but typically, larger tires are heavier, right? So them being heavier requires more juice to get rolling, off, from a start. So you can expect somewhere in the range of about 10% reduction in the full electric range, which is really not too unreasonable. You'd expect and see the same amount of range decrease in a internal combustion Wrangler as well. And my personal experience with my 4xe Rubicon on 38-inch tires, that's accurate. There's noticeably reduction in the range and also a little bit of power, but it's still got a lot of power.
Yeah, so we actually went for a ride in Landon's as well, and that was the one thing I noticed was the amount of power is crazy.
Yeah.
And he's pushing 38's.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. The electric motor comes in and it just smooths out the dead spots of the little 2-liter turbo.
So, for like the long trips where you don't have access to a plug, a multi-day trip, so will it run like as a gas motor at that point?
Yep, exactly. So it'll run just like any other 2-liter turbo, although it is a little bit more sluggish because the 4xe's are pushing somewhere in the range of 600-700 pounds worth of battery cells around. So it's still a pretty spirited little drive, and you'd be surprised just how good it still feels when the battery has depleted.
But then a day of driving, you'll be able to run it hybrid again a little bit, or no?
Well, that's where the hybrid drive modes come into play. So you have a hybrid mode, which is your most efficient blend of whatever power you have available in the 2-liter turbo gas engine. And then you have a full electric mode, which you can force it into running electric as long as it possibly can. Sometimes that's not the most efficient way to get around. And then there's also the e-save mode, and the e-save mode will store and keep as much power in the battery as long as possible so that you can use it in that all-electric mode when you get to the trail, for example. And that e-save mode also has the option to physically charge the battery while you're driving down the road, albeit at a pretty considerable hit to the fuel economy. They reserve somewhere in the range of 15% of the overall battery capacity that's unavailable to the driver, to the user, and that's what fills in those gaps when the battery is claimed to be flat.
So it makes me think that it is still a very viable option, especially for those of us that daily drive our Jeeps, that we need to get to work, and so basically you can still get to work daily, all electric. Then when you do these big long drives, yeah, you'll end up being in hybrid mode, but it's still gonna be a little more fuel efficient than, let's say, the 3.6, or is it about the same?
I would say it's about the same, probably a little bit worse, to be honest.
Okay.
Because when the liter is on and running, you know, it's a powerhouse, and you're running those higher RPMs. It's dumping a lot more fuel than maybe the 3.6 liter V6 would in the exact same scenario. But very similar, with really very little compromise, which is what makes this platform so great for most people. If you're unable to charge it overnight, it's maybe not the most viable option, but in most cases people can do that, whether using the level 1 charger that's included or at a level 2 charging station on any of the charging networks.
Very cool. So another thing we were talking about was the weight distribution on the 4xe. What makes it a little bit different is the Rubicon or the Eco Diesels. They all have the weight up in the front from the motor, especially like the Eco Diesel, much heavier motor. Whereas in these have a pretty light motor, and the weight is in the batteries, which sit underneath of the rear seats. So you do lose a little bit of room because of the batteries, but it also makes for a much better drive. Even as a passenger, I noticed that the Jeep doesn't bounce around nearly as much as a regular Wrangler. And so, here we are today. More and more companies making electric and hybrid vehicles. And the Jeep 4xe does look like it's a viable option. Even lifted, it maintains good electric mileage, as well as fuel mileage. You would need to bring some jerry cans on multi-day trips because the 4xe does have a smaller gas tank. But you'll be able to run around town essentially free, and still get out for very long trips. These lifted Wrangler 4xe's rode extremely smooth and were very fast. Whether or not the fuel savings from driving around town is enough to offset the trips is something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But what's crazy is, in 2020, there were more electric vehicles sold than manual vehicles, and that leaves me speechless. But it looks like no sound is the sound of the future. Be sure to check out one of our adventure videos, and if you like what you see, please subscribe. Until next time, go away, get lost, and unwind.